There are places in America that feel, at night, like they belong to something else. The national forests of the southeastern United States are like that. Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. Millions of acres of old-growth timber, mountain trails, creek beds, fire roads that go nowhere and come from nowhere. Places where a person can walk for 3 days and never cross another human footprint. The rangers and forest guards who patrol these places on the overnight shifts know a specific feeling. You've probably never experienced it. The feeling of being in a forest at 2 a.m., alone, a mile from the nearest road, with nothing between you and the dark but a flashlight and a radio that may or may not have a signal. In the winter of 2007, the rangers patrolling Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina had that feeling every night. The rangers in Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia had it. The ones covering Apalachicola National Forest in Florida had it. They just didn't know why yet. They didn't know that something was moving through those forests ahead of them, something that knew the trails better than they did, something that had been living out there in a converted van for years, watching, waiting, selecting. His name was Gary Michael Hilton. He called himself the Beast of Blood Mountain. And by the time the forest guards understood what they had been walking past in the dark, 4 people were dead. And investigators believe the real number is far, far higher. Before we talk about Gary Hilton, I need you to understand something about the forests he chose. The Appalachian mountain range runs like a spine down the eastern side of the United States, from Maine all the way south into Georgia, through North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee. The national forests that flank it are not parks in the way most people think of parks. There are no gates, there are no fences, there are no ticket booths or visitor centers at the trailheads. They are simply land, hundreds of miles of designated wilderness, accessible at hundreds of unmarked access points, managed by a skeleton crew of rangers whose territory on any given shift could cover tens of thousands of acres. In the daytime, these forests are full of people, hikers, trail runners, retired couples who have been walking the same paths together for decades, dog walkers, bird watchers, people who come to the trees because the trees make them feel safe. At night, they empty. The overnight forest guards work alone. Their job is part patrol, part maintenance, part search and rescue readiness. They drive fire roads on 4-wheelers and in trucks. They check on campsites, clear fallen trees from access roads, respond to the occasional tent-side emergency. They carry radios and sometimes sidearms. They are, in the vocabulary of the Forest Service, the last line of awareness. The human presence between the wilderness and whatever the wilderness might be doing after dark. Every one of them will tell you the same thing. Night patrol is different. Not because of wildlife, though that's part of it. Not because of the darkness, though the darkness in an old-growth forest is unlike any other darkness most people experience. It's different because of the silence. Because when you're in the deep forest at night, completely alone, every small sound becomes enormous, and the absence of sound becomes more enormous still. The rangers who worked those southeastern forests in 2007 knew that the woods had a rhythm, animal movement, wind, water, the specific creak of specific trees. After enough nights alone out there, you start to know the forest by its sounds, the way you know house by its creaks. And then, sometimes, the sounds are wrong. A branch breaking where no deer would be walking. footsteps that don't have the rhythm of a human walking and don't have the gait of an animal. A light, very faint, where no campfire should be. A smell that doesn't belong. The rangers in those forests in the autumn and winter of 2007 had been noticing things like that. They noticed a white Chevrolet Astro van, converted, with dark-tinted windows, parked at different trailheads in different weeks. Sometimes it was Pisgah, sometimes it was down near the Georgia state line. Sometimes it would be gone for a week and then reappear at a different access point 20 miles away. Nobody thought much of it. Van dwellers were not uncommon in the national forests. A person could legally camp in a national forest for up to 14 days at one spot before being required to move. And many people, drifters, retirees, veterans, people simply opting out of regular life, lived this way year-round, rotating slowly between sites, staying under the threshold that would require a ranger to move them. The man in the white van had a dog with him, a golden retriever named Dandy. Dog people, rangers will tell you, always seem harmless.
Gary Michael Hilton was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1946. By the time he became America's most notorious forest serial killer, he was 61 years old. This fact, that he began his confirmed killing spree in his 60s, is one of the most unsettling things about him, because it means he had 60 years of experience before anyone knew what he was. 60 years of practice. His childhood was unstable. He claimed it was traumatic, and the details that emerged later suggest he was not entirely wrong. He was diagnosed with sociopathic character disorder at the age of 14, following an incident in which he shot at his stepfather with a shotgun. Not in self-defense, he was just angry. He served in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper in the 1960s. He was honorably discharged in 1967, only after a documented schizophrenic episode. He came back from the military with whatever had been forming inside him since childhood, now trained, disciplined, and given physical language. He knew how to move quietly through terrain. He knew how to survive outdoors for extended periods. He knew how to track. In the decades that followed, Hilton drifted. He worked odd jobs. He had minor criminal records, drug offenses, drunk driving, petty theft. He was investigated repeatedly for more serious things, but nothing stuck. He was, to anyone looking at him from the outside, a slightly unsettling but ultimately unremarkable drifter. A man who never settled, who never built anything, who traveled constantly through the southeastern states, sleeping in vans, in tents, in the backs of vehicles, always moving. He knew the Appalachian Trail system the way a professional guide would know it. He knew which trailheads were monitored and which weren't. He knew where the cellular dead zones were, the valleys and ridges where a radio signal died and a person screaming could not be heard beyond 50 feet. He knew the forests. He had spent years in them, and he had, investigators would later determine, spent years watching. Hilton described himself as having 4 distinct personalities: a soldier, a scientist, an artist, and a comedian. He talked about them in an interview years later with a detachment that investigators and psychologists found deeply disturbing. The soldier, he said, was emotionless. Kill them all, let God sort them out. That's the soldier mentality. That was the personality, he said, that was present when he killed. Investigators believe that Hilton did not begin killing in his 60s. They believe he simply began killing in a way that got noticed in his 60s. As one investigator summarized, he didn't start in 2007. He just got better at it. How much better, and for how long, is one of the darkest open questions attached to his case. Because here is what is officially confirmed. Gary Hilton was convicted of 4 murders: John and Irene Bryant, an elderly hiking couple from North Carolina, Cheryl Dunlap, a Sunday school teacher from Florida, and Meredith Emerson, a 24-year-old hiker from Georgia. But here is the list of people he is suspected of killing, people whose cases remain technically unsolved. Judy Smith, a 51-year-old hiker whose bones were found in Pisgah National Forest in 1997. Rosanna Miliani, 26, who vanished from the Appalachian Trail in 2005. Michael Scott Lewis, 27, found decapitated in a Florida river in 2007. And others, missing persons whose disappearances share Hilton's signature: remote forest locations, solo hikers, periods of captivity, evidence of robbery. One investigator who spent years on the case put it bluntly. He said that they believe the number of victims is significantly higher than the confirmed 4. He said he doesn't think they will ever know the true count, because Gary Hilton spent 30 years alone in the forests of the American Southeast, and the forests keep their secrets.
On October 21st, 2007, Jack and Irene Bryant left their home in Horseshoe, North Carolina, and drove to Pisgah National Forest. Jack was 80 years old. Irene was 84. They had been hiking together for decades. These particular trails in this particular forest were as familiar to them as their own neighborhood. They were the kind of people that forest rangers know by sight. Regulars. Reliable. The type of couple who would wave at whoever was doing morning patrol and call out "Good morning" by name. They parked their maroon Ford Escape at the Yellow Gap Road trailhead off U.S. Route 276. They signed nothing, told no one exactly where they were going because they didn't have to. They had done this hundreds of times. Jack had a phone. He'd promised his family he always carried it. The forest that morning was exactly what it always was in October in the North Carolina mountains. Cold, clear, the kind of light that comes through old trees in autumn and makes everything look like a painting. The trail they took was one they knew well. They walked into the trees. But they did not come back. 2 weeks passed. Family members reported them missing. The Henderson County Sheriff's Department launched a search, more than 30 volunteers, cadaver dogs, a helicopter, foot teams going deeper into the forest than most people ever go. The search covered miles of trail and off-trail terrain. Investigators pulled Jack Bryant's phone records. What they found will stay with you. On the day he and Irene disappeared, Jack had tried to call 911. The signal was lost. The call dropped. He tried once. He had 1 bar. It wasn't enough. On November 10th, 3 weeks after they vanished, search teams found a body on the Barnett Branch Trail, covered with leaves. It was Irene. She had been beaten to death with a blunt instrument. The autopsy would reveal that she had been struck multiple times with something heavy. She was 84 years old. It took 3 more months to find Jack. In February 2008, 4 months after the Bryants disappeared, a hunter moving through the Nantahala National Forest, further south, found a skull in the underbrush. Dental records confirmed it was John Bryant. He was 80 years old. He never stopped trying to protect his wife. People who knew them said that about Jack immediately when they heard. He would never have gone quietly. He would have fought for her. There is some small comfort in what investigators believe happened, that he was attacked because he resisted, that he made it difficult. The forest guards who had known the Bryants, who had seen them at the trailhead, waved to them,
maybe exchanged a few words about the weather or the trail conditions, heard about the discovery, and had a specific, terrible reaction that is hard to describe. It is the feeling of realizing that the thing you suspected was in the dark was not a feeling. It was real. It was there when you walked past it. It was watching you too. By the time Jack Bryant's skull was found in February 2008, investigators had already connected the Bryant's disappearance to 2 other cases. Because Gary Hilton had not stopped. He had moved south, into Florida, into another forest, to another woman walking alone.
Cheryl Dunlap was 46 years old. She lived in Tallahassee, Florida. She taught Sunday school. She was, by every account, a gentle, giving woman. The kind of person who shows up for other people, who is reliable and present and warm. On the 1st of December 2007, while Gary Hilton was still moving through the southeastern forests, still in that white van with Dandy, the golden retriever, Cheryl drove to the Leon Sinks Geological Area, a beautiful stretch of the Apalachicola National Forest south of Tallahassee. She liked to sit by the limestone sinkholes there, sometimes to read, and sometimes just to be in the quiet. She was alone. She did not come home. Her friends noticed first. Cheryl hadn't shown up to teach her Sunday school class on December 3rd. That was wrong. That was the kind of wrong that people who knew her felt immediately. She was never absent without telling someone. They called her. No answer. They called again. Nothing. Her family reported her missing on December 4th. The search began. But the Leon Sinks area is deep in protected wilderness. Limestone caves, dense subtropical forest, miles of unmarked terrain. A search team is looking for a needle in a haystack when the haystack covers thousands of acres and the needle is wherever someone chose to put it. On December 16th, 12 days after she was reported missing, a hiker named Ronnie Rentz was moving through the Apalachicola National Forest with his dogs when the dogs stopped. They would not continue forward. They stood rigid, trembling, and would not move. Rentz walked forward alone. He found Cheryl Dunlap's decapitated body in the undergrowth. Investigators who processed the scene determined that Cheryl had been taken to the forest and held captive for approximately 2 days before being killed. Prosecutors would later establish a trial that Hilton had abducted her specifically to access her bank cards, to drain her accounts and fund his continued movement through the forests. He had taken her PIN number. He had used her cards at multiple locations. He had then, when she was no longer useful to him, driven her deeper into the trees. At trial, prosecutors established that he had then attempted to destroy evidence by decapitating the body and incinerating portions of it in a fire pit before dumping the remains and continuing north. He was already heading for Georgia. He already had his next target selected. And by this point, December 2007, the pattern had become visible to investigators across 3 states. An elderly couple in North Carolina, a woman alone in Florida, the same remote forest locations, the same robbery motive, the same evidence of captivity, the same signature. The Forest Service patrols in Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida were all briefed. Rangers were told there is someone moving through the national forest system in the southeast. A man, possibly in his 60s, a white van, a golden retriever. He uses the forests. He knows them. He is dangerous. Find the van.
the forest guards began looking for it on every patrol, every overnight sweep, every early morning run down the fire roads. They were looking for that white van. In the Chattahoochee, in the Nantahala, at every trailhead between Georgia and the Florida border. They didn't find it before January 1st, 2008. On January 1st, 2008, Meredith Emerson tied her shoes, clipped a leash to her black Labrador retriever, Ella, and drove to the Vogel State Park trailhead in Georgia's Chattahoochee National Forest. She was 24 years old. She was strong, athletic, experienced on the trail. She knew what she was doing. She had been hiking alone for years. None of that mattered to Gary Hilton. Meredith Emerson was the kind of person who makes other people better just by being around them. Her friends described her as an adventure person, someone who was always moving, always planning, always inviting people along for the next thing. She had done extensive solo hiking. She was trained in self-defense. She was fit, fast, and alert. She was the kind of hiker that if you asked a forest guard to describe an ideal solo hiker, the kind who knows how to handle themselves out there, they would describe Meredith. She disappeared in the Chattahoochee National Forest on New Year's Day, 2008. Witnesses at the trailhead that morning would later come forward to tell investigators they had seen a woman matching Meredith's description on the trail, and they had noticed a man walking with a golden retriever appearing to follow her. At the time, nobody thought anything of it. Trails are public, people follow the same paths. Gary Hilton abducted Meredith somewhere on that trail. What happened next, what Meredith did in the days that followed, is the part of this story that the investigators who worked the case still talk about years later with something that is unmistakably like awe. She fought. Hilton had done this before. He had a method. He would take control quickly, use the threat of violence to establish compliance, and then manage his victim through fear until he no longer needed them. It was methodical, cold, soldier mentality. Meredith Emerson refused to comply. She fought him physically in the initial abduction, fought hard enough that Hilton sustained multiple fractures in his right hand. He later confirmed this in an interview, describing her resistance with what sounded almost like bewildered anger. He said, "I had to hit her." He said it in a way that suggested she had forced him to, that her refusal to submit was, in his mind, her fault. He held her captive in the van for 4 days. 4 days.
Moving through the forest roads of northern Georgia, across back roads, in and out of remote parking areas, always moving, never stopping long enough to be found. He forced her to give him her ATM PIN. He drove to gas stations and ATMs at night, leaving her restrained in the van, making withdrawals. He was careful, methodical. He had done this before, but Meredith gave him the wrong PIN number. She gave it to him wrong on the first attempt, and on the second, and the third. She looked him in the face and she lied to him deliberately, over and over, buying herself time, costing him money, making noise whenever they were near people, creating a trail of witnesses who would see her face, remember her, report her. When Hilton tried to use her ATM card at a gas station convenience store, a clerk looked through the window and saw a woman in the vehicle. The clerk later came forward. They had noticed something wrong. They just didn't know what to do with the feeling in time. On January 3rd, Meredith's car was found at the Vogel State Park trailhead. Ella, her dog, was found on January 4th, wandering in a parking lot near Cumming, Georgia. On January 5th, investigators found a dumpster near a Quick Trip in Cumming. Inside, it were Meredith's bloodied clothing, her wallet, her driver's license, a University of Georgia ID card, and a blood-stained car seatbelt. A massive search began. Law enforcement across 3 states. The national forests were flooded with rangers, officers, search teams. The white van was circulated. The golden retriever description went out. On January 4, 2008, 3 days after Meredith disappeared, a Georgia State Patrol officer ran the plates of a white van near Cumming. The driver appeared agitated. He was an older white male. He had a golden retriever with him. His name was Michael Hilton. He was arrested at a car wash. He had been cleaning the van. He was cooperative, investigators said. Almost immediately cooperative. He knew it was over. He'd known it was coming for him, which is why he was at the car wash. Getting rid of evidence in the places where evidence remained. But he had not yet told them where Meredith was. He would tell them. He would trade that information for 2 things. The guarantee that his dog Dandy would be safely rehomed, and the removal of the death penalty from his sentencing. He led investigators to Meredith Emerson's body in the Dawson Forest Management Area. She had been killed, the coroner determined, by repeated blows to the head with a blunt instrument. She had been held for 4 days. She had fought for every one of them. She was 24 years old. Meredith Emerson's family established a scholarship in her name. The Meredith Emerson Memorial Mile is now run annually on Blood Mountain, the same trail where Hilton hunted. It is run every year by people who knew her and people who didn't. She is remembered as someone who fought.
After Gary Hilton was arrested, the rangers and forest guards who had patrolled those trails were interviewed. Some of them spoke publicly, some did not. What they described, collectively, was a specific kind of horror. The horror of looking back at every overnight patrol in those months and thinking, was he there? When I drove that fire road in November, was the van parked 50 yards into the tree line where my headlights didn't reach? When I heard something in the brush at 2 a.m., that specific sound that was wrong, that didn't have the rhythm of a deer, was that him? Was he watching me walk past in the dark? One ranger, speaking to a journalist after the arrests, said something that has stayed in the reporting on this case ever since. He said that the hardest part was not fear. He'd made peace with the job's risks a long time ago. The hardest part was the thought that he had been close enough to stop it. That he had walked the same trails, driven the same roads, looked out into the same darkness, and whatever instinct should have fired, didn't. The white van had been reported before. Multiple forest guards and rangers across Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida had logged the van at various trailheads in the months preceding the arrests. It was documented. It just wasn't connected. Not until the pattern became unmistakable. Not until the bodies were found. Not until 3 states were comparing notes and realizing that what they were looking at was not isolated incidents, but a single moving predator working the forest system like a hunting ground. The rangers who patrol those forests today work differently. Mandatory reporting for repeat sightings, cross-state coordination for suspicious vehicles at trailheads. A consciousness never stated officially but understood among anyone who does overnight work out there, that the forest at night is not empty. It never was. Gary Hilton lived in the Appalachian forest system for years. He knew its rhythms. He knew its blind spots. He knew the places where a van could sit for a week without being approached, where a fire could burn at 3 a.m. without being visible from the nearest road.
Where a person could scream and not be heard. He knew, specifically, where the patrol routes ended and the real darkness began, and he stayed just past that line. Patient, quiet, watching the trailheads for someone walking in alone. Gary Michael Hilton is currently on death row in the Union Correctional Institute in Florida. He has been sentenced to death in Florida for the murder of Cheryl Dunlap. He received multiple life sentences in Georgia and North Carolina for the murders of Meredith Emerson and the Bryants. He gave a long interview to Court TV in 2025 on camera in which he confessed, for the first time publicly, to additional crimes. He seemed to enjoy the interview. He called himself the Beast of Blood Mountain. He spoke about his soldier personality with the detachment of someone describing a professional skill. He is in his late 70s. His health is poor. He has said he doesn't expect to be alive much longer. The cold cases connected to him, Judy Smith, Rossana Miliani, Michael Scott Lewis, and others, remain officially open. Their families do not have answers. Some have been waiting for almost 30 years. The forests where Hilton operated are still open. The Chattahoochee, the Pisgah, the Apalachicola. Millions of people hike them every year. The trails are beautiful. The light through the old trees in October is exactly what it always was. The rangers still do overnight patrols. They still drive the fire roads alone, check the campsites, listen to the forest's rhythms. They still notice when something sounds wrong, when a branch breaks in the wrong place, when a light appears where no light should be. The white van is gone. But here is the thing about the forest at night that any ranger will tell you if you ask them honestly, late enough and quietly enough. The forest is not empty at night. It never has been. There are animals that only move after dark. There are people who camp deep enough in the backcountry that the nearest human being is an hour's walk away. There are fires in the clearings that no overnight patrol ever finds. There are sounds on still nights that have no explanation anyone wants to give out loud. Gary Hilton was not the first person to use the darkness of the American forest for terrible things. He is probably not the last. The rangers know this. They go out anyway. Every night, on trails that go dark 100 yards past the trailhead, with a flashlight and a radio that sometimes doesn't work, and the specific feeling of being watched that you learn eventually to put somewhere quiet in the back of your mind and just keep walking. They go out because someone has to, because the forest needs someone in it at night who is paying attention. Because the people who walk in during the day deserve someone watching the trails while they sleep. Because the darkness between the trees is not a place you leave unguarded. Jack and Irene Bryant knew those trails like their own neighborhood. Meredith Emerson was strong and fast and smart and fought with everything she had. They still deserved someone out there in the dark, watching the roads, logging the vans, connecting the dots before the bodies had to do it for them. That is what the forest guards carry with them now. Not just the weight of what happened, the weight of, what if we had seen it sooner?